There's a number behind financial stability that changes everything once you see it. It isn't a salary, it isn't a stock pick, it isn't the size of a house or the badge on a car. The number is smaller, quieter, and far more powerful than any of those things. Most people never calculate it, because they're too busy chasing the ones that don't matter. Consider a composite drawn from real data. A marketing manager in Denver earning $110,000 a year. On paper, winning. New car every 3 years. A kitchen renovation posted proudly online. Vacations that looked effortless. And yet, at 41, she had less than $2,000 she could actually reach in an emergency. High income. Zero stability. Now hold that against one more case. A public school teacher in the same city earning $62,000 before taxes. No renovations. No new cars. By the same age, more than $90,000 sitting quietly in accounts he barely thought about. One earned nearly double the other. The one who earned less could survive a lost job, a medical bill, a broken furnace in January without his life collapsing. That backwards gap is the entire premise here. For years, people have made the same quiet mistake, and the data maps it precisely. They confuse the appearance of wealth with the structure of it. They optimize for how rich they look this month instead of how stable they'll be next year. The teacher wasn't smarter. He held no secret investment, no inheritance, no advantage by marriage. What he had was a small set of rules, plain, almost boring rules, followed without drama and without exception. The manager had no rules. She had reactions. She responded to sales, to moods, to what her neighbors were buying. That's the real divide. It was never about knowledge. Almost everyone already knows they should spend less than they earn. Almost everyone already knows debt is dangerous. Knowing is not the problem. The problem is that behavior collapses the moment life gets complicated, and life is always complicated. So what follows is a specific set of minimalist money rules. The smallest possible number of principles that, applied consistently, keep a person financially stable regardless of what the economy does. Not 20 rules. Not a spreadsheet with 40 tabs. A short list. Because complexity is where good intentions go to die. One question has to be answered before any of it works, and it's the one almost every financial guide skips entirely. Somewhere ahead is a single rule that most people quietly break. The one that separated the teacher from the manager, even when both appeared to be doing the same things. It's rule number 3. It's where nearly everyone fails. Keep that in mind. It won't appear where anyone expects it. Financial stability is not built by people with the most willpower or the highest income. It's built by people who removed the need for willpower entirely, who designed their money so the right choice happened automatically, and the wrong choice required effort. That's the shift, from reacting to deciding once, from effort to design. And it starts with understanding why the human brain, left alone with money, almost always works against the person holding it. That's where the next part begins, with a flaw built into all of us, one that no amount of income can outrun. Here's the uncomfortable starting point. The human brain was never designed to handle modern money. For roughly 200,000 years, survival meant taking what was available now. A ripe fruit today mattered more than a promise of 2 fruits next season, because next season might never come. The brain that won that game rewarded immediacy, flooding the body with a chemical hit for consuming, acquiring, securing the reward right in front of it. That instinct kept the species alive. Dropped into a world of credit cards, one-click checkout, and infinite advertising, that same instinct quietly bankrupts the people still carrying it. Behavioral economists call this present bias, the tendency to value a reward today far more than a larger reward later, not a character flaw, a factory setting. When researchers study how people choose between money now and money later, the discount is almost comic. Offered $100 today or $120 in a month, a striking share of people take the $100. They know waiting pays more, they take the $100 anyway. Now watch how that plays out across an actual life. Consider a composite case. A software developer earning $95,000 in Austin. Every raise he ever received disappeared within roughly 90 days, not into disasters, but into upgrades. A better phone. A slightly nicer apartment. Dinners that felt deserved after a hard week. Each purchase was small, reasonable, defensible on its own. And each one quietly reset his baseline, so the new comfort became the new normal, and the next raise had to chase a life that had already expanded to meet it. Economists call this the hedonic treadmill. Run hard enough, and the ground moves at exactly the same speed. You end up where you started, just more tired. This is the trap the teacher from the previous block had somehow stepped off, and the manager was still sprinting on, same instinct in both brains. Entirely different architecture built around it. Because here's the part that changes everything. You cannot outdiscipline present bias. That is the mistake nearly every budgeting app is built on. The fantasy that more effort, closer tracking, and sufficient guilt will finally produce better behavior. The data says otherwise. Willpower is a finite resource. It drains across the day and collapses under stress and exhaustion. Precisely the conditions present when most real money decisions get made. Ask anyone who has shopped online at midnight after a brutal week. The rational mind that built the budget that morning is not the mind holding the phone at night. The people who stay financially stable do something quieter. They stop fighting the brain entirely. They stop depending on the version of themselves that is calm, rested, and clear-headed, because that version rarely appears when it matters most. Instead, they build systems that assume the weak moment is already on its way. They automate the good decision before that moment arrives, so that staying stable requires no willpower at all. The money moves. The saving happens. Whether they feel disciplined that day is beside the point. Design over discipline. That single reframe is the foundation everything else rests on. It explains why two people with identical knowledge, similar incomes, and the same temptations end up in completely different places by 40. One trusted their future self to behave. The other assumed their future self would be tired, distracted, and human, and built around it. That leads directly to the first concrete mechanism, not a mindset, not a resolution. A specific structure that quietly does the hard part, so the treadmill stops moving against the person standing on it. That's where the construction begins. Pay the future before the present ever sees the money. That's it. That's the mechanism. It sounds almost too simple to matter. It isn't. Most people do the opposite without realizing it. Income arrives. Rent, groceries, subscriptions, dinners, and impulses all take their turn. Whatever survives that gauntlet, if anything survives, gets called savings. Saving becomes the leftover, the afterthought competing against every desire that got there first. The problem is arithmetic dressed as psychology. Reverse the order, and everything changes. Consider a composite case. A nurse in Phoenix earning $71,000. For years, she promised herself she'd save whatever was left at month's end. Nothing was ever left, not because she was reckless, but because the month always found a way to consume itself. Then she changed one thing. The day her paycheck landed, a fixed amount moved automatically into a separate account she never touched and rarely looked at. 12%, gone before she could feel it leave. The first 2 months stung slightly. By the third, she stopped noticing. Her spending quietly reshaped itself around what remained the same hedonic treadmill, now running in her favor. 2 years later, she had built something she'd failed to build in the previous decade of trying harder. Notice what she did not do. She did not budget with more discipline. She did not track every coffee. She did not rely on feeling motivated on payday. She removed herself from the decision entirely. The transfer happened whether she was inspired, exhausted, celebrating, or grieving. That's the whole point. The phrase "paying yourself first" undersells what this actually is. It isn't a slogan. It's a structural inversion, moving the future to the front of the line, forcing the present to compete for scraps instead of the other way around. And it exploits a quirk in the same brain that causes the trouble. People adapt to whatever money they actually see, hide it before it registers, and that adaptation works in their favor. The research is direct. Studies on automatic enrollment in retirement plans found that when saving is set as the default, money diverted before it reaches the checking account, participation rates jump dramatically compared to plans requiring workers to actively opt in. Same people, same salaries. The only variable was the order of operations, whether the good decision happened automatically or required an act of will. Designed defeating discipline. One data point. The number itself matters less than the automation. 10%, 15, 20. The right figure depends on the life. Someone drowning in high-interest debt has a different first move than someone debt-free. But the principle holds regardless of income level. A person earning $30,000 who automates 8% will, over time, outlast a person earning $300,000 who saves whatever happens to be left. Which is usually nothing, because for the high earner, the appetite simply grows to match the plate. That is exactly how the marketing manager from the previous block, earning $110,000, holding less than $2,000 in accessible savings, ended up where she did. She was a world-class saver of leftovers. There were simply never any leftovers. Her money left in the wrong order every single month for 20 years. The first rule is deceptively small. Automate the future's share before the present can touch it. Set it, look away. But automation alone isn't enough. A person can save perfectly and still be one surprise from collapse. One broken transmission, one lost job, one hospital visit. Saving for later does nothing for the emergency arriving now. Which is exactly what the next rule exists to answer. But here's what nobody tells you about saving for the future. It can quietly leave you exposed in the present. Picture two people, both doing everything right on paper. Both automated their savings. Both watched a retirement number climb month after month. Then, life did what life does. One lost a job in March. The other faced a $4,000 transmission failure the same week a medical bill arrived. Same discipline. Wildly different outcomes. Because one of them had a buffer sitting between their life and disaster. The other reached for a credit card. This is the second rule, and it exists for a brutal reason. The money saved for 30 years from now is useless against a crisis arriving on Tuesday. Retirement accounts are locked, penalized, or invested in markets that might be down exactly when the emergency hits. Stability isn't only about the distant future. It's about surviving the near one without the entire structure collapsing. Consider a composite case. A warehouse supervisor in Columbus earning $58,000. For years, any spare cash went toward investments, chasing returns, allergic to idle money. It felt smart. Then his hours were cut for 11 weeks. He had no cash. What he had were investments he was forced to sell at the worst possible moment, locking in losses to pay rent, plus a credit card balance that took 2 years to clear at 24% interest. He didn't have an income problem that year, he had a liquidity problem. And liquidity is what keeps a bad month from becoming a bad decade. The emergency fund isn't an investment. That's the reframe most people miss. It's not supposed to grow. It's not supposed to earn. Its entire job is to exist. Boring, accessible, untouched. So that when the transmission dies or the layoff lands, the answer is a quiet transfer instead of a panicked spiral into debt. The common guidance is 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, not income. Expenses. The number that keeps the lights on, rent paid, the family fed, if every dollar of earnings vanished tomorrow. Unstable income or a single earner supporting a household, closer to 6. Dual income home with stable employment, 3 may hold. But where the fund starts matters more than where it ends. Federal Reserve research has found that a striking share of households could not cover a modest, unexpected expense without borrowing or selling something. Not a catastrophic expense. A few $100s. That fragility doesn't stop at lower incomes. It cuts deep into the middle class, into households earning 6 figures who appear entirely secure from the outside. So the first move isn't 3 to 6 months. That number paralyzes people. It feels so far away that most never begin. The first move is $1,000. A single, small, defiant buffer that converts most everyday emergencies from a debt event into a non-event. The flat tire. The urgent care visit. The broken appliance. Once that exists, the larger cushion gets built the same way the future gets funded. Automatically, quietly, before the present can spend it. These first 2 rules stack. The nurse from before automated her future. Now she needs a second automated stream, filling the buffer that protects the present. 2 transfers. 2 accounts. 0 reliance on willpower the moment the crisis hits. And yet, someone can automate their savings, build the buffer, and still end up financially cornered. Because there is a force capable of consuming every dollar of progress faster than it can be built. A rule most people quietly break, even while believing they're doing everything right. That's rule number 3. And it's next. This is rule number 3, the one promised since the very first minute. The one that quietly separated the teacher from the manager, even when both appeared to be doing everything right. Here it is, stated plainly. Never let a fixed cost rise to meet a rising income. Read that again. It sounds harmless. It is anything but. Almost everyone breaks it, not through recklessness, but through reward. Through the entirely reasonable belief that earning more should mean living better, and that living better means committing to something bigger. A larger apartment. A newer car on a longer loan. A gym membership. A streaming bundle. A subscription used twice and forgotten. Each one small. Each one defensible. And each one signing the same dangerous contract, a promise to pay, every single month, regardless of what comes next. That's the trap, not spending, committing. There's a critical difference between the two, and missing it is what corners people who believed they were safe. A one-time purchase, however large, ends. A fixed cost does not. It becomes a permanent claim on every future paycheck. A standing order that fires whether the raise holds, whether the job survives, whether the economy turns. Variable spending can be cut in a bad month. Fixed costs cannot. They keep demanding money long after the income that justified them disappears. Return to the marketing manager. $110,000 a year, less than $2,000 within reach. Look closely at where her money actually went, and it wasn't chaos. It was contracts. A car payment that renewed every 3 years. A mortgage stretched to the edge of approval. Subscriptions layered on subscriptions. Every raise she ever earned was immediately absorbed by a new commitment, sized to match it. She wasn't spending her income. She had pre-spent it, years into the future, before a single dollar arrived. Economists call this lifestyle inflation. Its cruelty is precise. It rises easily and almost never falls. Raising a standard of living takes an afternoon and a signature. Lowering it feels like failure. Like moving backward in front of everyone watching. So people don't. They hold the fixed costs and trust the income to hold too. Usually it does. Until the 1 month it doesn't. Now watch the teacher and notice what he did that looked like nothing. His income rose over the years. Modest bumps. A step increase here, a stipend there. But his fixed costs barely moved. Same apartment far longer than his peers thought reasonable. A paid-off car driven well past the point of pride. When income rose, the gap between what he earned and what he owed simply widened. And that gap, the space between income and obligation, is the actual raw material of financial stability, not the salary. The gap. 2 people can earn the identical amount. The one with lower fixed costs is structurally freer, able to save more, absorb a shock, walk away from a bad situation, survive a downturn without the whole scaffolding collapsing. Low fixed costs are not deprivation, they are leverage, they are options, they are the difference between a setback and a catastrophe. The discipline the rule demands is specific. When income rises, direct the increase, or most of it, toward the future and the buffer, before it can harden into a new monthly obligation. Let variable comforts flex. Guard the fixed line like it is load-bearing. Because it is. This rule punishes people for winning. The raise arrives and it feels like permission. The rule says treat it as fuel, not as license to expand. Master that instinct, and everything already built compounds quietly in the background. But there is a cost that slips past even the disciplined, invisible, automatic, draining the gap from the inside. That's next. There is a cost that slips past even the careful. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as a bill anyone chooses to open. It simply happens, quietly, automatically, month after month, draining the gap between income and obligation from the inside. How much does a forgotten subscription actually cost? Not $9 a month, that's the number on the screen. The real cost is $9 multiplied by every month it goes unused, multiplied by the fact that it never triggers a decision. Nobody sits down and chooses to pay for a service they stopped using. The charge just fires, and because it's small, it never crosses the threshold of attention. It's beneath the line where the brain bothers to react. That's the entire danger. These costs are engineered to be invisible. Consider a composite case. A graphic designer in Seattle earning $84,000. She considered herself careful, no reckless spending, no dramatic debt. But when she finally sat down and listed every recurring charge on her statements, she found $41 a month in subscriptions she had genuinely forgotten existed. A streaming service signed up for to watch one show, a cloud storage tier doubled by accident, a meditation app used exactly twice, an annual membership that had quietly renewed for 3 years running. None of it felt like spending. That was precisely the problem. Spending you can feel, you can cut. Spending you can't feel keeps going forever. $41 a month is roughly $500 a year. Left in a low-cost index fund over a working lifetime, that same amount could compound into tens of thousands of dollars. She wasn't losing $500. She was surrendering a future sum many times larger for services she didn't even remember buying. This is where the modern economy quietly turned against the person holding the wallet. The old danger was the single large purchase, visible, deliberate, felt. The new danger is the subscription model, built to convert one-time attention into permanent, frictionless payments. The friction to sign up is near zero. The friction to cancel is often deliberately high. Buried menus, phone calls, retention offers designed to exhaust the will to leave. That asymmetry isn't accidental. It's the business model. Subscriptions, though, are only the visible edge of a wider pattern. Investment fees are the sharper example. A fund charging 1% annually instead of 0.1% sounds trivial, a rounding error. Over decades, that gap can quietly consume a significant share of an entire portfolio's final value. Not through a crash, not through a bad bet, through a small number, deducted silently, compounding against the investor instead of for them. The lesson isn't frugality for its own sake. The lesson is attention placed where it actually matters. On the automatic, the recurring, the invisible. The costs that never ask permission are exactly the ones worth auditing, because they compound without limit and defend without effort. Once a year, pull every recurring charge into the light, every subscription, every fee, every automatic draft. Force each one to justify its existence, not by whether it was worth signing up for once, but by whether it earns its place today. Most won't survive the question. The ones that do, keep without guilt. An hour of attention, once a year, defending the gap that everything else depends on. And yet, even a person who automates their savings, builds the buffer, guards their fixed costs, and hunts down every hidden leak can still be undone by a single force. The most expensive mistake in personal finance, one that doesn't drain the gap slowly. It swallows it whole. That's next. It swallows it whole, not month by month, not dollar by dollar, all at once. And then it keeps taking long after the original mistake is forgotten. The force is high-interest debt. To understand why it deserves its own rule, you have to see it for what it actually is. Everything built so far, running in reverse. Saving works because of compounding. Money set aside earns a return, and that return earns its own return until small amounts quietly become large ones. It is the single most powerful engine in personal finance. High-interest debt is that exact same engine, pointed at the person instead of working for them. Interest compounds on the balance. The balance grows even when nothing new is spent. The person paying it is now feeding the machine that was supposed to feed them. Consider a composite case. A restaurant manager in Nashville earning $67,000. A rough year, a car repair, a slow season, a holiday stretch left him carrying $8,000 on a credit card at 23% interest. He made the minimum payment faithfully, month after month, feeling responsible for never missing one. What he didn't see was the arithmetic underneath. At the minimum, a significant share of every payment went to interest alone, barely touching the balance. Left on that path, the $8,000 would take well over a decade to clear, and he'd pay back nearly double what he originally owed. He wasn't paying off a debt, he was renting it indefinitely at a punishing rate. That's the trap of the minimum payment. Designed to feel like progress while guaranteeing the opposite. It keeps the borrower current, comfortable, and permanently in place. Here is the reframe that changes the math entirely. Paying off a debt at 23% is not spending money. It's an investment with a guaranteed, tax-free return equal to the interest rate. No stock, no fund, no market on earth reliably pays 23%. Yet people routinely invest cautiously for a possible 7% return, while carrying a 20+% debt that erases it many times over. Money growing at 7 while debt burns at 23 is a person running up the down escalator, wondering why the top never gets closer. So the rule is direct. Before chasing returns, extinguish anything charging more than the market could ever reliably pay back. High-interest debt is not a background condition to manage, it's a fire to put out. But which fire first, when there are several? The data points to two paths, and both work differently. One targets the highest interest rate first, mathematically optimal, saving the most money over time. The other targets the smallest balance first, regardless of rate, psychologically powerful, because eliminating a whole debt entirely delivers a visible win that fuels the next one. Behavioral researchers studying repayment found that people who knock out small balances first often stay motivated longer and are more likely to finish. The perfect strategy abandoned halfway loses to the imperfect one completed. The math matters. The human staying with the plan matters more. Notice how the rules interlock. The emergency fund established earlier isn't just protection against disaster. It's protection against this specific disaster. Without a buffer, the next surprise goes straight onto a card at 20+%, and the fire reignites the moment it's out. The buffer and the debt payoff aren't separate projects. They defend each other. There's a reason this rule sits where it does in the sequence. A person can automate savings, guard fixed costs, and hunt every hidden fee, and one balance at 23% quietly undoes all of it. Stop the reverse compounding first, then the forward compounding finally has room to work. Which raises the question everything so far has been circling. Once the leaks are sealed and the fire is out, where does the money actually go? That's next. The leaks are sealed. The fire is out. The buffer stands. Now comes the question everything has been building toward, and it's where most people either overcomplicate their way into paralysis or hand their money to someone who profits from their confusion. Where does the money actually go? The instinct at this stage is to make it dramatic, to go looking for the clever move, the stock that doubles. The sector everyone's whispering about. The accounts are finally in order, so surely the reward is the thrill of picking a winner. That instinct is exactly the one that quietly destroys the progress already made. Consider a composite case, an engineer in San Diego earning $102,000, disciplined for years. He automated savings, cleared debt, built a proper cushion, executed every earlier rule without fault. Then he decided the boring part was over. He began trading individual stocks, chasing momentum, selling in fear when prices fell, buying back in after they climbed. Over 4 years, he underperformed a simple index fund he could have bought and ignored entirely. He wasn't unlucky. He was average. And average active investors, the data consistently shows, lose to the very market they're trying to beat because they trade against their own emotions at the worst possible moments. Here is the uncomfortable truth about building wealth. The mechanism is astonishingly dull. Buy broad ownership of the entire market through a low-cost index fund. Contribute automatically, do it regardless of the headlines. Leave it alone for decades. While compounding does work, no human hand can replicate. That's it. That's the engine. It feels too simple to be powerful, which is exactly why so few people trust it. There's no story in it, nothing to post about, no moment of genius to claim at dinner. It's the financial equivalent of watching grass grow, and it quietly outperforms the overwhelming majority of professionals paid enormous sums to do better. Study after study on fund performance points the same direction. Over long stretches, the large majority of actively managed funds fail to beat a simple, low-cost index. The people paid full-time to win this game, armed with teams, terminals, and data no individual investor can access, mostly lose to a strategy requiring no skill and almost no attention. If they can't reliably beat it, the individual trading on a phone at midnight cannot either. The reason ties directly back to the first flaw this series identified. The brain that discounts a future reward in favor of an immediate one is the same brain that panics when markets fall and grows reckless when they soar. Active investing isn't defeated by a lack of intelligence. It's defeated by human wiring, emotional reactions that fire hardest exactly when the stakes are highest. The index approach wins not because it's smart, but because it removes the human from the decision. Same principle as automating savings. Same principle as holding fixed costs low. Design over discipline. Again, time is the real force here, not the cleverness of any single choice. A modest sum invested consistently and left untouched for 30 years outgrows a larger sum invested brilliantly but interrupted by fear, fees, and constant tinkering. The market's long climb is only available to those who stay seated through the drops. And the drops are guaranteed. They are the price of admission, not a signal to flee. This rule also cannot stand alone. Without an emergency fund, a market downturn forces a panicked sale at the bottom to cover a crisis. Without low fixed costs, there's nothing left to invest. Without debt cleared, returns are erased before they compound. The boring engine only runs when everything built before it remains intact. The money goes into ownership, quietly, automatically, for a very long time. But even a perfect system holds a hidden crack, one that appears not in the numbers but in the mind of the person watching them. That's next. Even a perfect system holds a hidden crack. It doesn't appear in the spreadsheet. Every account is funded, every rule followed, the numbers flawless on the screen, and still, the person watching them can quietly destroy everything. Not by breaking a rule, but by feeling too much. The crack is emotional. It opens widest at the exact moment stability matters most. Consider a composite case, a physical therapist in Minneapolis earning $79,000. She had done everything this series describes: automated savings, a full emergency fund, no high-interest debt, a low-cost index portfolio funded faithfully for 9 years, a model of discipline. Then the market fell, sharp, ordinary, the kind that arrives on schedule every handful of years. Over 11 weeks, her portfolio dropped by roughly a third. The headlines screamed. She was checking the app several times a day. So she sold, not all of it, just enough to stop the pain. She locked in a loss that had existed only on a screen until the moment she made it real. Then she waited for clarity, for a bottom, for a signal that never announces itself. By the time she felt safe enough to buy back in, the market had recovered and climbed past where she'd sold. The rebound was gone. 9 years of quiet, correct behavior, undone in a single frightened afternoon. She didn't have a knowledge problem. She had a nervous system. The brain that discounts the future and panics in the present doesn't fade as a person gets wealthier. It follows them all the way up. The larger the account, the larger the swings feel in absolute terms. Because a 30% drop on $100,000 is $30,000 vanishing. And no amount of reading about market history prepares the body for watching it happen live. Behavioral researchers have measured this directly. Loss aversion studies show the pain of losing a given amount registers roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining the same. A loss doesn't feel like the mirror image of a gain. It feels like a threat. And the ancient brain responds to threats by acting, fleeing, selling, doing anything to make the danger stop. That impulse once saved lives. Now it empties portfolios. Here is the reframe that protects the entire structure. Volatility is not the risk. Volatility is the price. The drops are not a malfunction. They are the mechanism by which the market pays long-term holders more than a savings account ever could. The return exists precisely because most people cannot stomach the ride. The investor who stays seated is compensated for the discomfort the investor who flees refused to bear. So the defense is, once again, design over discipline. The therapist's mistake wasn't weakness, it was access. She could see the damage in real time, and seeing it made her move. The stable investor removes the trigger before the fear arrives, checking the portfolio quarterly instead of hourly, automating contributions so buying continues while prices fall, and deciding in advance, in writing, that a declining market is a signal to keep going, never to run. The decision made once, in calm, defends against the decision made 100 times, in panic. Every principle in this series removed the fragile human from a fragile moment. This one removes them from the most dangerous moment of all. But there is a final rule none of the others can replace, the one that determines whether any of this was ever worth doing. That's next. There is a final rule the others cannot replace. Without it, everything built so far is just a larger pile of numbers with no reason to exist. Money is not the goal. It never was. The goal is what money quietly buys when handled correctly: the freedom to choose. A person can follow every rule flawlessly and still miss this one entirely, accumulating for its own sake, hoarding out of fear, mistaking the scoreboard for the game. The rule is this: define what the money is for, or the money will define you. Consider a composite case. A systems analyst in Portland, earning $88,000. By any measure, a success. He automated his savings, cleared his debts, held fixed costs low for 2 decades, and invested calmly through 3 market drops. By 51, he had built more than most people ever will. He was also miserable. He worked jobs he'd stopped enjoying years earlier. He turned down a lower-paying role he actually wanted because the number in the account had become the only number that mattered. 30 years learning to accumulate, not once asking what he was accumulating toward. He won the game, he just never decided which game he was playing. That is the quiet failure at the top of the mountain. The rules in this series are extraordinary at building the gap, defending it, growing it. But a gap with no purpose becomes its own trap. A treadmill of a different kind, where enough is always one more year away, and the fear of losing it never actually leaves, no matter how large the balance grows. Here is the reframe. Financial stability is not the ability to buy anything. It is the ability to say no to the job that is hollowing out from the inside. No to the crisis that would have owned someone else. No to the fear that drives most spending in the first place. The teacher from the beginning of this series was not stable because he had $90,000. He was stable because that money bought him something specific and priceless, the option to survive a bad year without his life collapsing. He knew what the money was for. It was for sleep, for choice, for a floor beneath his feet. The marketing manager, earning nearly double, never bought that. Her money bought the appearance of a life. His bought the substance of one. Behavioral research on spending and well-being points consistently in one direction. Beyond covering real needs and a reasonable margin of comfort, additional spending on possessions delivers little lasting increase in life satisfaction. Spending aligned with autonomy, security, time, and connection tends to endure. The dollar itself is neutral. What it is pointed at determines whether it returns anything at all. So the final rule closes the loop. Every earlier principle removed the fragile human from a fragile moment, automating the save, guarding the gap, surviving the crash. This one puts the human back at the center, deliberately, to answer the only question that gives the rest its meaning. Stable for what? Free to do what? Protected so that what becomes possible? A person who never answers that question can follow all 9 prior rules and still arrive at the same emptiness as someone who broke every one of them. Different route. Same destination, a life measured entirely by a number that was never the point. Wealth is built to last, but lasting is not the same as living. The rules exist so that money stops being a source of fear and becomes a source of options. The last discipline is knowing what those options are for before the years left to spend them are gone. That is the whole architecture. 10 rules, interlocking, each defending the next. But knowing them and living them are 2 different things, and the distance between the two is where nearly everyone still fails. That is next. Knowing the rules and living them are 2 entirely different things. The distance between them is where nearly everyone fails. Behavioral researchers call it the intention-action gap, the measurable space between what people sincerely plan to do and what they actually do. Studies tracking financial resolutions find that a striking majority of people who intend to save more, spend less, or start investing never follow through. Not because they forgot, but because intention alone was never enough to move them. This is the trap that swallows every list of good advice ever written. Consider a composite case, a project coordinator in Kansas City earning $73,000. She watched dozens of finance videos. She could explain compounding, index funds, emergency buffers, lifestyle inflation, all of it, fluently. She nodded along to every rule in a series exactly like this one. A full year later, nothing had changed. No automation, no fund, no cost cut. She had confused understanding a solution with implementing one, the most common financial mistake there is, and the most invisible, because it feels like progress. Learning feels like doing. It isn't. Here is the uncomfortable turn. The entire architecture of these rules was built around one insight. The human being cannot be trusted in the fragile moment. Present bias, loss aversion, the panic in the drop, the temptation at the register. Every rule removed a person from a decision they were likely to get wrong. But there was always one decision that could not be automated away. The decision to begin. That first act, opening the account, setting the transfer, scheduling the audit, requires the very thing the rules were designed to replace. A moment of deliberate effort, taken before any system exists to carry it. And this is precisely where intention dies. People wait to feel ready. They wait for the higher salary, the calmer month, the cleared plate, conditions that never quite arrive. They treat the beginning as something that should feel inspired. It never does. The research points somewhere unexpectedly practical. Studies on follow-through show that people who attach a plan to a specific time, place, and trigger dramatically outperform those relying on motivation alone. Not, "I'll start saving soon." Instead, the morning after payday, I will open the account and set the transfer to 12%. The vague intention fails. The concrete, scheduled, almost mechanical one survives. The difference between the two is not willpower. It is specificity. Design over discipline, applied now to the beginning itself. And notice how small the real first step is. Not 10 rules at once. That guarantees the same paralysis that 3 to 6 months of expenses once produced until the target shrank to $1,000. The person who attempts everything on a single Sunday implements nothing by Friday. The one who sets up a single automatic transfer, one rule, one action, 15 minutes, has done more than the fluent expert who spent a year nodding and never moved. One rule, lived, beats 10 rules, admired. The project coordinator eventually broke her paralysis with the smallest possible move. One transfer, 12%, the morning after payday. She did not feel ready. She did it anyway, because the plan told her when, and the automation meant she only had to be brave once. That is the whole secret hiding at the end of every financial education. The knowledge was never the barrier. The barrier was the belief that more knowledge would eventually produce action on its own. It won't. Somewhere, the person watching has to close the distance. One unremarkable act, done before it feels comfortable, scheduled before motivation is consulted. Which leaves only one question standing. What actually changes the day someone stops learning and starts building? That is next. What actually changes the day someone stops learning and starts building? Less than expected and far more than they imagine. The first month is almost boring. A transfer fires. A small amount lands in an account nobody checks. Nothing feels different. No fireworks, no transformation. This is the part that defeats people who expected the change to feel like the moment they finally understood the rules. It doesn't. The understanding was loud. The building is quiet. Consider a composite case. An administrative assistant in Cleveland earning $54,000. When she set up her first automatic transfer, she described it later as anticlimactic. For 8 weeks, she kept checking to see if she felt more responsible, more stable, more in control. She didn't. Then something shifted, and it wasn't in the account. A car repair arrived. $600. The kind of expense that, a year earlier, would have meant a credit card, a knot in the stomach, another balance to carry. This time, she moved money from a buffer she'd barely noticed building, paid it, and moved on. No spiral, no panic. The event that would have owned the old version of her became a Tuesday errand. That is the moment the rules stop being theory, not the day they're learned, the day they're first tested and hold. What actually changes was never really about the numbers. It's the relationship between a person and their own money. Fear gives way to design. Reaction gives way to a decision made once and then trusted. The low hum running quietly under most financial lives, "Am I okay? Will I be okay? What happens if?" begins to fade. Not because the balance is enormous, because the structure is sound. A person can be stable long before they are wealthy. That stability was the thing missing all along. Return to the two people this series opened with. The marketing manager earning $110,000, less than $2,000 within reach. The teacher earning $62,000, $90,000 quietly accumulated. The difference was never intelligence, income, or luck. One of them had built a system that assumed they'd be tired, tempted, frightened, and human, and protected them anyway. The other trusted a version of themselves that rarely showed up when it mattered. Every rule in this series pointed at that single divide: pay the future first, build the buffer, guard the fixed line, hunt the invisible leaks, kill the high-interest fire, own the whole market and leave it alone, survive the crash by removing the trigger, decide what the money is for, then begin, with one small scheduled act taken before it feels comfortable. None of it required genius. All of it required design over discipline, repeated until the right choice became the automatic one. The open loop from the first minute can finally close. The rule most people quietly break, letting fixed costs rise to meet rising income, was never the hardest to understand. It was the hardest to feel, because breaking it feels like success in the moment and only reveals itself as the trap years later. That delay is why it wins. And that delay is exactly what a system built in advance is designed to outlast. The person watching does not need more rules. They have enough. What remains is a single, unremarkable action, scheduled, taken before motivation is consulted. That is the whole distance between knowing and living. Wealth is built quietly, structurally, by people who decided once and then let the design carry them. This is education, not personalized advice.